Welcome, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to the level set, or afternoon or evening, whatever time you engage in listening to this discussion. We're going to pick up where we left off last week with respect to dealing with pattern recognition. And one of the patterns that we've identified that is fundamentally important for us to understand how we arrived at where we are is the pattern of genocide. So we can do two things. We can call a thing, which is what it is, genocide, genocide. And number two, identify where we are and how we got here. That's the fundamental bases for discovering history. Not because history is going to always repeat itself, but because history shows you how you got to where you are. And if you can identify those patterns, as Dr. Alexander has defined as being one of the motivating things to understand the sameness of individuals and the sameness of groups, will be better positioned to be where we need to be. So thank you all for your attention and time. And Dr. Alexander, why don't we pick up where we were last week?
Absolutely. And so continue to read from the document and then we'll add some content, some context. We'll add some context to some of the things that he references, that Patterson references in the document. So picking up, we have not dealt here with the cruel and inhumane policy of this government toward the people of Puerto Rico, impoverished and reduced to a semi-literate state through the wanton exploitation and oppression by gigantic American concerns, through the merciless frame-up and imprisonment of a hundred of its sons and daughters. This colony of the rulers of the United States reveals in all its stark nakedness the moral bankruptcy of this government and those who control its home and foreign policies. And so what is he talking about when he's talking about Puerto Rico? So we know that the Spaniards colonized Puerto Rico, and they were there from probably roughly 1493, maybe 1494, somewhere, 1490s. So right after Columbus. From that point, all the way until the end of I think the Spanish-American War, at which time the United States took over because the United States defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War and ended up with Puerto Rico and Guam. All right. But what's going on in 1950 that would add context to this 1951 charge of genocide? Well, I'll tell you. And so this comes from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Starting in the 1950s, Puerto Rican women were coerced into sterilization and used as test subjects in developing the modern birth control pill. Pattern recognition, brother. So this is
Absolute.
They were targeted primarily due to issues of eugenics. Hey.
Mm-hmm.
Were not given much, if any, information about either La Operación or the pill, and written off as unreliable when describing serious side effects. Then it references a film, and it's probably good for us to watch this film and for people to seek out this film. Ana Maria Garcia, 1981 film La Operación, tells the story of the women subject to these programs, which resulted in 1/3 of all Puerto Rican women having been surgically sterilized. All right. And so again, the film is La Operación, and it's by Ana Maria Garcia in 1981. And so this is how pervasive this stuff is. This is what goes on. This is one of those patterns that we have to recognize. And and we really need to do, a deep dive. We need to do a deep dive on how some of our leaders have been, and when I say our leaders, I'm saying Black folks, have been complicit in some of these activities. And so this isn't an issue about necessarily, this is not an issue about the need or the efficacy of the birth control pill. This is about how they went about creating and testing it, and the rights violations that go into, first of all, there's coercion, and then which means there's there's coercion and there's no information. So there is no informed consent. Now, there probably weren't laws about informed consent at the time, but they obviously know there's a problem with doing, the method that they chose suggests that they knew that there was a problem with doing what they were doing. Otherwise, they would have did it with white women, right? And they didn't. They did it with Puerto Ricans, and let's see who else they did it with. You look like you were about to raise a point.
Well, first of all, it's an assault. It's an offensive touching of one's body. In addition to that, anytime you attempt to alter the ability for one to procreate, those laws and those policies are reviewed under what's known as strict scrutiny, which is a standard that the law has, and it's the highest level of it's the highest level of justification that the government must prove that they were entitled to do. And I can just about assure you that those practices would not stand up to the rigors of strict scrutiny. So this wrong is just a glaring example of the brutality of individuals that have waged war against unsuspecting communities.
Indeed. And some more information from University. This is out of University of Vermont. This in a document titled "Eugenics: Compulsory Sterilization in 50 American States." American eugenics refers to, inter alia, to compulsory sterilization laws adopted by over 30 states that led to more than 60,000 sterilizations of disabled individuals. Many of these individuals were sterilized because of disability. They were mentally disabled or ill or belonged to socially disadvantaged groups living on the margins of society. Ha! What's the key word or phrase in that?
Well, I picked up several.
Socially. So who were
marginalized,
the socially, yes, who were the socially disadvantaged groups living on the margins of society in the United States,
right?
At this time.
Right. And the same one that's living on the marginalized states at this time.
Yes.
The same
Yes.
one. So people of color, the same ones that have lived through a number of different political campaigns and parties that still suffer the same fate. That's who. That's who.
And so, so again, when we look at this document, we have to know, that this isn't about an event. This is about a disposition that the United States government takes toward persons of color, right?
It's not acute, it's chronic.
Correct. Um, and so we have to look at it in that way. And so we see this group acting. So we know that this group, being the white supremacists, so we know what happened to the indigenous people of the United States, right? We know what happened, what happened, what happened, and happens to us. And I guess I need to say that with the indigenous people of the United States, what happened and what happens to them. We know what happened and what happens to us. Um, you know, we know what happened and happens to Puerto Rico. So again, this is about that pattern recognition. And we know, so what those things that he's referring to about Puerto Rico in 1950. So he's alluding, to the exploitation and the oppression, and he also makes and he also alludes to the fact that they literally turned it into a, just as a factory and a farm. And so at that point, what was going on there is that you had big business going into Puerto Rico to exploit, the resources there.
I'm going to go to the document here. Just one second, Doc. And I don't want you to get away from your point, but I'm going to go directly to the document to show you and to illustrate what folks think about people, Black and people that they perceive to be on the margins and fringes. And I'm going to start with my own premise that in a capitalistic environment, we are seen as labor. I'm going to quote Amos Wilson once again, Dr. Amos Wilson, that the biggest export in our community is subservient labor. That's the way they look at us. That's the way they continue to. And it's up to us if we go back to the Colored People's Convention where they stated that we are not to take those jobs. That was in the charter.
Yes.
We're not to take those jobs. We're supposed to elevate over that right now. And here we are celebrating this foolishness. And there's nothing wrong with an honest day's pay. Nothing. But that shouldn't be the goal because we've reduced ourselves to fit into a cup that we've never been able to fit into. And we're the only ones that don't understand that. And, and I don't want to be facilic here and have a simplified analysis right here over a very complex problem. That's not my intent, and we can analyze that. We understand all of the issues that we have, and I can tell you that myself, and I can speak for Dr. Alexander, knowing his family background. We come from privileged backgrounds from the standpoint we have very, very healthy families, which is the first institution. So from that standpoint, I get all of that, and I'm not sitting here grandstanding. But what I do need you all to understand is that we've got to be very intentional about what we're doing, because this is what they think about us. This is out of the charge of genocide, and this is part of the opening statement. This is one of the issues. And so what these elders did was they laid the case out. But this is one of the specific cases. We want the General Assembly to know of the martyred Martinville 7 who died in Virginia's electric chair for rape they never committed in a state that has never executed a white man for that offense. But we want it to know 2 of the 8 Negro prisoners who were shot down and murdered on July 11th, 1947 at Brunswick, Georgia, because they refused to work in a snake-infested swamp without boots? That's what they think about us. And you want to hear something more cavalier than that? You want to hear something more cavalier than that? Well, I got it out of the same document, the exact same document. There's a brother that was hunting, had his gun in his hand, hunting on land that he was legally allowed to be on. Game warden comes and shoots him in the back of the head and tells and after he shoots him, he tells William Brown in Louisiana, a farmer, was shot in the back of the head and killed when he was out hunting on July 19th, 1947 by a white game warden, who casually announced his unprovoked crime by saying, "I just shot a nigger. Let his folks know." The game warden, one Charles Ventral, was not even charged with the crime. That's not that long ago. That was the same year Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. I understand where we are.
These are the causes celebrity, right? Causes celebrity.
So I mean,
these are the examples that are listed in the document. Correct.
And so I mean, I just wanted to tie that to your point with respect to the way they were categorizing and justifying, the Puerto Ricans, justifying the treatment of them.
And what we have to understand, and that's, and this is where you could see the impact of the trauma on us when we have these situations now, and the range of responses that we have to it. Like, on the one hand, you'll have people say, like, when did the police start just killing Black folks? Like, this stuff is new, right? And then you have situations, so you have that, and then you have situations where, people, on the other hand, on the other extreme, where people have been so desensitized that they don't even react.
That is the issue right there. And I have to catch myself with that as well, because you do become used to the ticking in your engine. If it didn't, the car still starts and it ticks, and it shouldn't be ticking. And that is it. And it just chips away with you. And that is, that's something we've got to develop. And, we talk about people developing tolerance. We need to refine our intolerance. There's so much that we just say, okay, that's just part of the game. Well, no, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
History has shown that the racist theory of government of the USA is not the private affair of Americans, but a concern of mankind everywhere. So again, I think we just necessarily have to have a broader view, and I think that we are becoming more insular, and we come up with reasons to kind of justify our insularity. And so, like, I mean, you have X number of Black folks who are perfectly fine with what's going on in the Middle East right now, in Palestine right now, because they have convinced themselves that this is the manifestation of prophecy. And so, this is.
And those are people that have absolutely no grasp of history. They have they have absolutely no grasp of biblical history. They have no grasp of the concepts that are associated with the Zion movement. Nothing. These are people that have heard that from an ill-informed pulpit somewhere, and they're running with it. But that could not be a bigger lie. I mean, it's just, there's nothing about that that is the manifestation of, except the justification that's being used by some, that, some are justifying their acts by, saying that this was prophecy, but this is not it. It's not.
And so, we have to be knowledgeable, we have to be thoughtful. And so, you know, we have to know that these things are going on and that these things impact us. And we have to understand, again, it's not a private affair, as he states here, but the concerns of mankind everywhere. And so why is that, again, why is what's going on over there relevant to what's going on to us, what's going on for us now? Again, it's about the pattern recognition. What you have is a settler colonial experiment and what we call Israel, and and the forced displacement of millions of Palestinians. And this is no different than what occurred when the Spanish, when the Portuguese, and then ultimately the British and the French came here, and then the British, and then between the British and then what became the United States, were able to dispel those other foreign powers to rule this place. And this is what we see going on in real time. And it can only occur in the Middle East to the degree that the United States and Britain funded. And so what we see, that place that we call Israel exists by and large because of Britain and the United States, and it will be sustained by Britain and the United States. And so, if the United States, I mean, we know what the United States domestic policy is. So, if we observe the if we observe with a critical eye, the violence that's being perpetrated against the Palestinians right now, that is being funded by the United States government, then that can't help but to inform your perception of how the United States government treats you here, right? And this document is simply telling us that this is what was going on. This was their perception of the United States then. These things have not changed much in that regard, and so we have to be aware of that. And that's why we have to review source documents such as this, because again, we have this thought that we have this we being our our smart Black folks, that we have arrived, and that we have a perception of the United States that is different from from our parents and grandparents and this, that, or the other, because we're more sophisticated, and that we're more politically savvy and all this kind of stuff, and that is far from the truth.
I think it's the opposite of the truth. I
Yeah.
think we have, the further away from the lash we get, the less discipline we get, the less scholarly we get, the less I think our knowledge base is being eroded as well. So it is, it's, it's the best of times and the worst of times in a sense, because we do have individuals that are doing extremely well individually, but we've always had that.
Indeed, indeed. And so, a couple of more points that we want to look at. To the General Assembly of the United States, or to the United Nations, excuse me, the responsibility of being the first in the history to charge the government of the United States of America with the crime of genocide is not one your petitioners take lightly. The responsibility is particularly grave when citizens must charge their own government with mass murder of its own nationals, with institutionalized oppression and persistent slaughter of Negro people in the United States on the basis of race, a crime abhorred by mankind and prohibited by the conscience of the world, as expressed in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 9th, 1948. And so again, we have to connect these dots. That's why I continue to focus on what's going on in Palestine today, is because all of this is happening at the same time. So we are in that space while he is taking this to the United Nations. The United States and Britain are working with the Zionists, to establish Israel. All of this is going on at the same time. And in fact, at 51, Israel has been established. Right. And so, Israel is recognized as a nation state at this point. And so when he's going, or when they go to the United Nations, they don't have the benefit of being received by Black heads of state.
Right.
That's not where we are at that point. Other thing that we have to keep in context is, again, 51, what we've recently come out of World War II. This is another issue why it's problematic for the United States that you have this gentleman going before the United Nations, and particularly with the charge of genocide, because it could be questioned, and it certainly was questioned. Did the United States commit genocide by dropping the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
Or war crimes in general.
War crimes in general, which is another point that has to be considered. Now is that, so whether or not in Palestine you could prove intent relative to Israel and the Palestinians, which I actually believe you can, but it's another thing. The war crimes statute, our standard, is pretty simple. I mean, they're bombing hospitals. They're bombing refugee camps. They're bombing schools. They're bombing other cultural centers. They're intentionally bombing residential areas.
They're bombing journalists' homes. Over 61.
They are targeting journalists, right? And they told the people to go south, and then they started bombing the south. And so, so that becomes another piece, and that also becomes another piece for us to consider when we're talking about genocide here. And that, okay, so so if you don't think, when I'm talking to Black folks, So if you don't think that this is genocide, you at the very least, you have to, you know, rise up against those things in which we can look clearly, look at the patterns of behavior, right? And so one of the things again that they do when they submit the document, they have these things, grouped, killings of members of the group, right? And so if we look at, you know, so we know what's been going on here. So we were in the streets after um, after Big George. We were in the streets. Uh, at the Michael Brown, we were in the streets. Several other of those murders resulted, those murders that were occurring in Kenosha, folks were in the streets, right? But when the riot occurred, that was because of police violence in the community. We were in the streets, right? When the riots occurred in Harlem, and what is that? I think in '64. It's because the police had killed um, a teenage black kid. And I mean, so if we look at the history of uh, of our street revolts, you're going to find that the overwhelming majority of those were in response to some police activity in our communities.
Well, let's call it what they are. They're governmental actions.
And
These are sanctioned government actions that.
well, and that is absolutely necessary, and that's why it's necessary really to kind of start to look at these things, from uh, you know, from the purview of international law, so that to we start to look at these things as systemic occurrences, right? Because again, we keep thinking that this is about Billy Bob, but this is about government or state sanctioned violence against us, and it happens at the federal, and it happens at the state, and it happens at the local level.
And I think the one glaring example to me, because it really will dispel almost any of the myths that we have with respect to this not being a governmental move, was the bombing and the out and out killing of individuals that have been labeled as the move in Philadelphia. That came at the behest of the mayor's office,
Of
right?
the Black mayor's office, as a
Black,
matter of fact.
what was it, Wilson Good at the time?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, so this notion that we're insulated against governmental brutality all the time, just based on the complexion of the situation, is a fallacy as well. We need to be sanctioning good government across the board. And I'm not, an anti-government person. I am a humanity seeker. And I think the government's role in the liberation and the self-actualization of the Black community needs to be highlighted, and we need to quit acting like, um, you the Black community is a community that needs to solely be self-reliant. And I'm a self-reliant guy, but there's not a corporation in the United States that doesn't get government help.
Absolutely.
There's not.
And and that and to that point there, that's where we have to understand what the play is, and that's where the pattern recognition again is necessary. So these people who keep arguing about big government, all they're seeking to do is to redirect your tax dollar to private entities.
That's correct.
It's all it is just a scheme towards privatization and using tax dollars to do what they use tax dollars to do. Just the fact that they just announced, right? So on the one hand, we got all of these people who are going to jail because they cheated on the PPP piece, right? Right. Now, Tom Brady didn't cheat. So, all these multimillionaires, and these other entities who, that were not in desperate need of those monies. They applied for those monies and they got those monies. And now, if you got one of those loans have been forgiven, right? And and I'm not saying that the people that committed fraud shouldn't be in trouble. I'm saying they're not the only people that commit fraud.
This is fraud, right?
And so, but these things, these things are troubling from a certain vantage point because they keep us drawn in. So let's take the student loan forgiveness. Okay, so this is a campaign promise, right? And they've made significant strides in that space. I am a beneficiary of that student loan piece.
As am I. As am I.
Now, but
shout out to Kamala and Joe B.
You could shout them out, but and I felt the same about the money that he gave to the HBCUs. He gave more money. So, like in Alabama, he gave. I think he gave. I think he gave like 40 million or something like that to Alabama State, and maybe 30 million to A&M. I mean, we can find out these numbers, and whatever other colleges that are in Black colleges that are in Alabama, got some millions of dollars, but you got $52 million to the University of Alabama. And so,
what they need money. We've already given them all the athletes they need. Why do we need to give them our tax dollars?
Well, it doesn't create parity.
No.
And so so what was, it's almost like undoing. So and I'm not saying that they don't get any money. I'm saying they already get money. They get the university. So the whole problem with what goes on for the HBCUs is that they're not getting the money, in proportion, right? And not getting the appropriate state, and they're not getting the state funding that matches with the other schools, the other state funded schools, and they're not getting what they're supposed to get from the feds. And so when he gives that amount to the University of Alabama, that doesn't create any measure of parity because they were already 10 to 20 times ahead of Alabama State or Alabama A&M anyway. And so when he's doing these things, and I'm not saying he shouldn't do those things, I'm saying when he does those things, we got to be mindful of the, what does it actually mean in relative terms. And so even with those monies, even with the loan forgiveness, it doesn't appreciably close any wealth gap.
No.
Right. And so and so what happens is he does these things on the domestic piece that need to be done because they needed to be done. Right. But what's going to happen is it accrues to him, and it impacts our ability and willingness to look critically at what he's doing internationally. And also what he's not doing domestically. We don't have a voting rights act.
We do not. We do not.
And we're not going to get one.
No. But to your point, $160 million was given to Alabama, University of Alabama, 160. HBCUs, as of an October 2023 report, have been underfunded at least $12 billion.
And so he gave 160 million to Alabama.
That was the federal grant to the University of Alabama.
In the context of all of this, right? And so, so yes, we need the money, but we need the money because we were underfunded. They were not meeting their obligation.
Well,
so
we've got to,
and we keep blaming Black people. Well, y'all need to fundraise. That ain't how they get their money. And so we absolutely need to pay our alumni dues and all that kind of stuff. But that is not going to fund the institution. We need the state and the federal matches. That's what has to happen. It's been clearly established. You just gave the number, and that gross number doesn't even account for the history of the HBCUs. That gross number goes back to what, like 87?
Right.
That's just
if that far back.
Yeah, that covers, a relatively short period of time, given that, we're talking, HBCUs are institutions that were started in the 1800s. And so in the past, 30 years, they've been underfunded billions of dollars. We're not talking about the history of their existence, right? And so this is a problem. But, again, this is he indicates in 1951, again, trying to make people aware that this is not a one-off. Here we present the documented crimes of federal, state, and municipal governments in the United States of America, the dominant nation in the United Nations, against 15 million of its own nationals, the Negro people of the United States. These crimes are the gravest concerns of mankind. The General Assembly of the United Nations, by reason of the United Nations Charter and the Genocide Convention itself, is invested with the power to receive this indictment and act on it. Right? And so, so this has to be one of our grounding documents, right? Coming out of, Kwanzaa, on January 1, the final day, if this here isn't a call for Umoja, if it's not a manifestation of Kujishagulia, if it's not, if this is not calling for, Ujima, what else is, right? This is about unity. This is about self-determination. This is about, cooperative and collective work and responsibility. That's what this is, and this is how we have to move. This is how we, again, when we are talking about the ancestors, this is the ancestors talking to us, right? We have to take these documents and operationalize these documents. And so, again, it's got to categorize killing of members of the group. And so you referenced that space. Economic genocide is what we're talking about now when we're talking, even in our references to the HBCUs.
And I mean,
Emasculation
I
of
can give
democracy.
individuals in St. Louis a real-time view. Harris Stowe State College is a state college, just like the University of Missouri St. Louis, just like University of Missouri at Columbia, just like Rolla. Why does their main building look the same way as it did over the last, I don't know, 100 years? That means something. You know, I mean, the atmosphere and environment of these facilities have an effect on you emotionally. Why are we going through a time warp every time we go in there? What are we telling our students? Just a thought.
No, and again, these things, they require close scrutiny, and we can't keep saying, well, it's up to the Black alum. Y'all don't give. That's not what this is.
Nah.
And you know, but part of this is because we don't necessarily understand when we pay taxes what that is supposed to do. And and so you pay taxes because that's what funds the state, that's what funds the municipal, state, and federal government. And then those monies are supposed to come back in proportion to what the places give, right? And if you have state-funded institutions, all of those state-funded institutions are supposed to get, certain apportionments or allotments. And Lincoln doesn't get its fair share, and Harris Stowe doesn't get its fair share. And those are the facts. Here, Chicago State doesn't get its fair share.
Kennedy King,
And so
Malcolm X College.
these things are, well, Malcolm X is it's
Still
kind
around?
of, well, it's kind of in the space of being I don't know if co-opted is the right word, but it's kind of being taken away.
Is that right? How so?
Yes. I mean, as the demographics change, and on the near west side and what they call the West Loop and things of that nature, there are shifts in the resources, towards Malcolm X relative to some of the other schools to bolster up those programs and to attract a different demographic and to employ a different demographic than what was historically the case. Which is the same thing that's going on at the high school level with Whitney Young High School.
Okay, this is almost getting a little too much for me to stomach this early on a Saturday, even though it's mid-morning.
Yeah. So,
both of those are stalwarts of particularly Whitney Young, of excellence. They're on the South Side, so yeah, I'm gonna have to. It's gonna take me a minute to digest that one.
yeah. And so we'll just wrap up with these last couple of sections of the document. I mean, you referenced in part what was occurring then and what is occurring now in terms of the killing of members of the group. Again, there's also reference to economic genocide. We shall offer proof of economic genocide or in other words of the convention, proof of deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction in whole or in part. We shall prove that such conditions so swell the infant and maternal death rate and the death rate from disease that the American Negro is deprived when compared with the remainder of the population of the United States of 8 years of life on average. That has not changed. I mean, we could see the impacts of the economic genocide on healthcare. I mean, we just had the greatest example of such when we're looking at the carnage of the pandemic, right? And so the pandemic put into context what it looks like to be Black from an economic position in as much as it did from a medical position, right? So if you don't have access to, healthy food, if you live in a food desert, that is an economic issue that has medical and physical implications. And so leading up to the pandemic, what did we hear? Folks who have high blood pressure, folks who have diabetes, folks who have respiratory issues are, disproportionately vulnerable to COVID. Well, who has disproportionate rates of those conditions? Black folks. Why? Because we are, so we talk about redlining all the time, right? And so again, this is 51. He's writing this document. When was the housing case in St. Louis? That was 47 or 48.
Which one were we talking about?
What is that? Kramer? Is that the name of that? Is
Oh,
that case?
Kramer v. Shelley?
Yeah.
Kramer v. Shelley. I want to say, I thought it was later than that. I'll look it up.
So,
Yeah, I thought it was later than that, but I wanted to get to, while you were on that infant mortality rate and the disparity.
yeah.
I just heard sat in on a lecture by demographer from St. Louis University, and he talked about the infant mortality rate in our community, and the thing that is I shouldn't even say most troubling, because any of them, the thing that takes away this notion that a lot of folks in our community like to say, well, it's class, it's not race. Well, that's not true. The infant mortality rate for upwardly mobile African Americans in St. Louis City is roughly 8%. The infant mortality rate for rural individuals that have refused Obamacare is about 2%, that qualify for Obamacare and have refused it. Nationally, the infant mortality rate for African Americans, Black, non-Hispanics, is 10.4%. 10% of our babies are dying. 10% of them. That's a crisis.
Yes.
For Hispanic white women, it's 4.4%. For non-Hispanic white women, it's 2.4%. So you mean to tell me they tougher than our women? Or what is going on? This is ridiculous. What are we?
The last statistic you gave was what?
2.4%.
But that's for what?
For non-Hispanic white women.
So that's the maternal death, the maternal death rate.
That's the infant mortality rate. Yes.
And so the other thing also, and that's why I was asking. So the other thing to look at also is so we have the highest infant mortality rate, and then we have the highest maternal mortality rate. As a result of complications in pregnancy. And so these are economic issues that have medical implications
that are violence against us.
that are violence against us. And so, and this is where it kind of gets to the intricacies of these issues. Further, we shall show a deliberate national oppression of these 15 million Negro Americans on the basis of race to perpetuate the conditions of life. Negroes are the last hired and first fired. They are forced into city ghettos on their rural equivalents. They are segregated legally or through sanctioned violence into filthy, disease-bearing housing and deprived by law of adequate medical care and education. That's what we're talking about here, right?
That's exactly
from
what we're
birth to death,
about.
Negro Americans are humiliated and persecuted in violation of the Charter and Convention. They are forced by threat of violence and imprisonment into inferior segregated accommodations, into Jim Crow buses, Jim Crow trains, Jim Crow hospitals, Jim Crow schools, Jim Crow theaters, Jim Crow restaurants, Jim Crow housing, and finally into Jim Crow cemeteries. And so, again, that economic piece has impact on our medical care and our education. We're not always conceptualizing these things in such a way. Why does it impact education? Because if you can't get a house, you can't pay taxes on your house, you can't pay taxes. If you can't get a job, you can't get a house, right? So we need jobs so that you can get a house, so that you can pay property taxes, because those property taxes then go into funding education. And so that is a part of the problem. That's what occurs when we're not allowed to participate in the job market. It has implications for the services that are available to us in the medical care. And what do we see? We see high infant mortality, high maternal mortality, and then we just see disproportionate rates of all the other maladies, right? And so these aren't new problems. And so we will say things like, well, back in the day, you used to be able to just, it ain't never been a time where we've been less than, we've had less than twice the unemployment rate. Even now, where we say that we are at the height of our powers, in the main, we make 65 cents on the dollar. These are facts, right? So the economic genocide continues. It could be argued that our numbers even look, and this ain't no hard argument, this is just math. Our numbers even look the way, they even look like they've improved at all because we have sports and entertainment. So if we didn't have those thousands of people, on the extreme end, so it's 400 cats in the NBA, right? And so they're multimillionaires. And then, I don't know how many people in the NFL, so let's say it's 1,200. Let's say that. So let's say it's 1,200 cats in the NFL, right? And then you throw in, Oprah, J and V, and Quincy Jones. Guess what? The richest white woman has $100 billion.
And she can't give it all away.
She got more money than all of us put together. And so there's a gross disparity. That just is what it is. And we get, I'm glad for everybody who's striving and who's achieving, but we can't allow that to skew, our perception of the truth in terms of where we are in this place. So we'll say, we spent $9 trillion. That would make us the, third, second, third, largest. No, they don't. Because you can't compare our spending to GDP. We don't produce jack. And whatever we produce for them.
Isn't that ridiculous?
We don't even, you know what I'm saying? We don't recognize the gain of what our relative productivity is. It goes to the system.
Dr. Henry Clark said Black folks should at least manufacture one category, if it's shoestrings or
Yes.
socks or drawers, and we won't do any of that.
And so, we struggle to kind of understand the piece, but that's why we have to use these source documents to at least give us a point of reference, to at least allow us or to help us to level set, right? That's what we got to do. We shall prove that the object of this genocide, as of all genocides, is the perpetuation of economic and political power by the few through the destruction of political protests by the many. Its method is to demoralize and divide an entire nation. Its end is to increase the profits and unchallenged control by a reactionary clique. We shall show that those responsible for this crime are not the humble, but the so-called great, not the American people, but their misleaders, not the convict, but the rogue judge, not the criminal, but the police, not the spontaneous mob, but organized terrorists licensed and approved by the state to incite to a Roman holiday. And so we struggle now to understand what systemic oppression means. These brothers and sisters put this thing in a very, very, first of all, it's easily accessible. All you do is type in, "we charge genocide," and it's going to pop up from a lot of different sources. And some of them are going to show you copies of the actual original document. Some of them are going to show you the document retyped and clean. And so, but the point is that we have to read this so that we understand, again, that we ain't really just fighting Billy Bob.
The document does a very good job of identifying these violent acts, physical violent acts in both Michigan, New York, the North and the South. So this
Yes.
notion that this is an insular problem in one area is folly.
We shall offer evidence that this genocide is not plotted in the dark, but incited over the radio into the ears of millions, urged in the glare of public forums by senators and governors. It is offered as an article of faith by powerful political organizations such as the Dixiecrats and defended by influential newspapers, all in violation of the United Nations Charter and the Convention forbidding genocide. And so this is what they put together here is a document that literally walks you through all of the complexities of, racial trauma in the United States, from the beginning up to 1951. And we're going to war against the United States from behind enemy lines. That's the other remarkable thing about this.
That's correct.
And so if we can do that in 51, we can do that now. Right? We have the same grounds. And that, again, that's why, why we're reading this document to kind of set us up for some more in-depth conversations. But we want people to understand that this isn't some new insight, right? And
Doc is frozen. You're freezing on me, Doc.
As if he didn't do anything for that merit celebration, right?
Okay, Doc, you froze on us. Repeat that.
As if we're about to celebrate Dr. King's birthday,
Right,
as if he didn't do anything that merited celebration,
right.
right? And so, the reason we are celebrating Dr. King's birthday is because he was fighting all of these things that this brother is talking about. We have an NAACP because of all of these things that this brother is talking about. Now, what I haven't found, just as I mentioned the NAACP, I'm sure I could probably find something in which the leadership of the NAACP probably spoke negatively about this document, because I know that they spoke negatively about some of the people who are signatories to the document. And so these two are some of the complexities that we will talk about,
Is it complexities, or are we following the money?
uh, um, it could be both. I mean, I think following the money is a complexity. And when I say complexities, I'm talking about in the manner in which so when we choose to go back and look in the past, we have a tendency to romanticize the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about what folks call the modern civil rights movement, we keep saying that there was this point where all of the people were organized and unified, and that is not true.
None of the organizations were ever unified.
And so there was internal stress and strife in the organizations themselves, and then there was, so there was within there was problems within organizations and problems between organizations, right? And so the NAACP was overtly at odds and with Paul Robeson. So I know I just had to find the documentation. I know that they said something about this. And I'd just be hard pressed for me to believe that they wouldn't, because they had been denouncing Paul Robeson before this. So so if they didn't say anything about it, it's because they were already, they had already said whatever they were going to say, and they were probably ignoring him at this point. But the NAACP became they were like literally the attack dog for the United States government relative to Paul Robeson and other Black folks who are identified as socialists, and so we just got to break some of those things down. This proof does not come from the enemies of the white supremacists, but from their own mouths, their own writings, their political resolutions, their racist laws, and from photographs of their handiwork. Neither Hitler or Goebbels wrote obscurant racial incitements and voluminously or viciously than do their American counterparts, nor did such incitements circulate in Nazi mails any more than they do in the mails of the United States.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I mean, like, so we talk about Nazi Germany and and the Holocaust as if all of this was not happening in the United States simultaneously, right?
Where did they get the blueprint for all of that?
And they got the blueprint from eugenics. Eugenics. They got the blueprint from eugenics from the United States.
That's correct.
And so what was going on in Nazi Germany, has its genesis in the United States. What was going on in South Africa has its genesis in the United States. And so we got to be mindful of these things, and because we have to better understand and appreciate the nature of the beast. And this is the last piece I'll read for this week. Through this and other evidence, we shall prove this crime of genocide is the result of a massive conspiracy, more deadly in that it is sometimes understood rather than expressed, a part of the mores of the ruling class, often concealed by euphemisms, but always directed to oppressing the Negro people. The members are so well drilled, so rehearsed over the generations that they can carry out their parts automatically and with a minimum of spoken direction. They have inherited their plot and their business to is they have inherited their plot and their business is but to implement it daily so it works daily. The implementation is sufficiently expressed in decision and statute, in depressed wages, in robbing millions of the vote and millions more of the land, and in countless other political and economic facts as to reveal definitively the existence of a conspiracy backed by reactionary interests in which are meshed all the organs of the executive, legislative, judicial branches of the government. So it is meshed all the organs of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. It is manifest that a people cannot be consistently killed over the years on the basis of race, and more than 10,000 Negroes have so suffered death, cannot be uniformly segregated, spoiled, impoverished, and denied equal protections before the law, unless it is the result of the deliberate, all-pervasive policy of government and those who control it.
That's
Right.
that.
So, go ahead.
That's that.
I mean, and again, they're fighting this in the midst of, so this isn't, a document written, this is not a reflective document. This is a real-time document.
That's correct.
Right. And and again, like we're in this space now where we talk to Stella about talking truth to power, right? This is talking truth to power, And so, again, we just want to expose the people, to some we want to expose, to others we want to remind, right? We ain't the only people that know about this, and that's not what we're professing here. But there are people who know this and are not operationalizing this, who are not teaching this and talking about this within their sphere of influence. That's what we need. This is what we need in the wake of the constant onslaught. This helps us to better understand and self-correct. So like when we're seeing book bans, we can't keep thinking that this is a new thing. We got to go back and do what we did before in response to book bans, right? There's really never a time where there wasn't censor, there wasn't some type of censoring of the content, But there was a time is that it was even illegal for us to learn to read at all. It was illegal for us to even have books. It was illegal for us to write, right? That time exists. What doesn't exist is a time free of censorship. So there's always been oppression, and there's always been censorship, and there's always been ways to get around it. We have to listen to the wisdom. We got to read. We have to consider these wisdom texts. We have to listen and engage with the ancestors and figure out how we fight this, because there had to be some success in what they did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
And this general assumption that we have integrated into the society and a part of the fabric, that is something that's going to get you killed. You need to understand that we have very, very specific needs and goals. You spoke about the Voters' Rights Act that we so desperately need. And so we need to, one of the things many of us need to do is take a sober look at where we are. And, you know, I'd like to get a takeaway from you, Doc, on, summating takeaway. But we've got to work for self-reliance through all of the agencies and aids that exist and not put pressure on ourselves, further blaming individuals that have been waged war against unbeknowingly on a number of different fronts. I mean, if you look at what we talked about today, economically, healthcare, physically, the thing that, one of the pieces that's seldom spoken about, and, Chris Rock did a great job of representing the interests of the mainstream, and his entire special devoted to covering the media and how the media never robbed him at an ATM, is the media. The fashioning of the imaging, the dehumanization of us, is something that has been done with pinpoint precision. Now, um, uh, you are seeing this over glamorization of Black women taking um, docile white husbands. Those images are powerful. I'm in the camp my mother is in. If you can find love under a rock, get it, but know why you're getting up under it. So, and one thing, my takeaway from all of this, one of the takeaways is that number one, we've got to preserve the institution of the family because that's a bedrock for stability for the vast majority of us, whether you take a wife or not, or a husband or not. But we've got to preserve the bedrock of the family. And we're the only race in the history of mankind that's ever been paid to break up the family. Yeah, we literally paid, individuals' welfare to split the family up. So that's never been done. The other thing we have to do is be extremely intentional about every aspect of what we've got going on. Those pillars that you spoke about. So, uh, uh, Doc, you have anything else to chime in before we sign out?
Simply that we 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 have these conversations because we're encouraging people to take more of a defensive stance in the wake of this, you know, in the wake of this destruction and in the wake of this onslaught. This is not a new thing. This is what is. This is the nature of our existence, and um, we we have to understand that, as he stated at 51, that this this that we have to see this as intentional. We have to see this in the governors, in the senators, in the judges. We have to see this in the police. We got to see this in the principals, in the superintendents, in the teachers, right? So at every level of society, these people, they just know what their roles are. As he stated, these are not new, new prescriptions for us. This is what the people have always been saying. Again, chose this document because it was brought before the United Nations in December of 51. So coming out of December, thought it was a good jump off point. But there are many other source documents that we're going to put in front of you that clearly outline what it is that we've always fought for, who we've always fought against. We've been fighting against the same enemy forever. So who we're fighting and what we're fighting for. and sometimes I am very clear that we're not always clear. I'm clear that we're not always clear.
Okay. No, we're not. And a lot of that is by design because
Yes,
the enemy that we have that throws a rock and hides his hands. And then when you have control of the media and you have control of the narrative, you have control of the legal system, you do what you want. You make it up as you go along. And then the biggest thing we want to succumb to too many times is this rugged individualism that's cast upon us, and that's just not it's not going to get it. Individuals, as Dr. Carr says, will never beat institutions. They will not. You will not, as an individual, beat an institution. So yeah, I'd like to encourage everyone to take Monday, and I don't care if you're working or not, but reflect on the works of Dr. King. This whole month is something that we do. I have a book with the speeches in them, and I try and read a speech a day during this month. And well, shout out to the women of Delta Sigma Theta, and it's their Founders Day. Happy Founders Day, ladies. And
happy Founders Day, ladies.
we at the Level Set salute you, and we think the world is a better place because of the works that you all have done. So, having said that, God willing, we'll join you next week. You can find Level Set on YouTube, and you'll be able to find it on several social media outlets. And we look forward to seeing you soon.